Hello my dear friends, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're exploring one of the darkest and most shocking stories hidden inside history, the story of Andrew Carnegie. Let's get started. At one point in American history, Andrew Carnegie was one of the richest human beings alive. His fortune was so massive that even modern billionaires would struggle to compare to it. He built libraries, funded schools, donated unimaginable amounts of money, and became famous as a symbol of the American dream. To millions of people, Carnegie represented hope, proof that a poor immigrant could rise from nothing and conquer America itself. But hidden behind that inspiring image was a far darker story. Because the empire Andrew Carnegie created was not built with kindness or generosity. It was built inside blazing steel mills where exhausted workers risked their lives every single day. Men worked brutal shifts surrounded by fire, molten metal, toxic smoke, and machines powerful enough to tear the human body apart within seconds. Some workers lost fingers, some lost limbs, others never returned home at all. Yet while laborers destroyed their bodies inside Carnegie's factories, the Steel King himself became richer than almost anyone in modern history. And perhaps the most disturbing part of all was this: Andrew Carnegie truly believed he was doing the right thing. To understand how Carnegie became one of the most ruthless billionaires in American history, we need to go back to Scotland in the early 19th century, long before skyscrapers, Wall Street power, or giant steel empires existed. Because Carnegie's obsession with success did not begin in luxury. It began in fear. Andrew Carnegie was born in 1835 in Dunfermline, Scotland, into a poor working-class family. His father, William Carnegie, worked as a handloom weaver, a respected trade at the time. But the Industrial Revolution was transforming Europe rapidly, and machines began replacing traditional workers everywhere. Factories could produce cloth faster and cheaper than individual weavers, and thousands of families suddenly found themselves trapped in poverty almost overnight. The Carnegie family suffered terribly during this period. Money disappeared. Work became unreliable. The family struggled to survive while industrialization destroyed the old world around them. Young Andrew watched his father slowly lose confidence and stability as economic pressure crushed the family's future. The humiliation of poverty left a deep psychological scar on him. Carnegie later admitted he never forgot the feeling of helplessness that came from having no money. Eventually, the family made a desperate decision. Like many struggling Europeans during that era, the Carnegies chose to leave everything behind and immigrate to the United States. America represented possibility, opportunity, and survival. But the journey itself was difficult, and when they finally arrived, life did not suddenly become easier. The family settled in Pennsylvania, where industrial factories dominated the landscape. Smoke filled the skies. Machines thundered constantly. America was growing rapidly, but for poor immigrants, survival remained brutal. Andrew Carnegie began working at an extremely young age. At just 13 years old, he worked inside a textile factory changing spools of thread for exhausting hours each day. The conditions were harsh, repetitive, and physically draining. Workers earned very little money while factory owners accumulated wealth. Carnegie understood quickly that poor laborers were easily replaceable. If one worker collapsed, another desperate immigrant immediately took his place. That realization terrified him. Unlike many others around him, Carnegie refused to accept a future of endless factory labor. He became obsessed with escaping poverty permanently. He studied successful businessmen carefully. He listened to conversations about money and industry. At night, while exhausted workers slept, Carnegie often educated himself by reading books and studying business ideas. He believed knowledge itself could become a weapon powerful enough to change his destiny. And slowly, opportunities began appearing. Carnegie eventually found work as a telegraph messenger boy. It may not sound impressive today, but at the time, telegraph systems represented the cutting edge of communication technology. Information moved faster than ever before, and Carnegie quickly realized something extremely important: The people controlling communication and transportation were becoming the most powerful people in America. He worked obsessively hard. Carnegie impressed supervisors with his memory, discipline, and ambition. He learned how businesses operated behind the scenes. More importantly, he started building connections with influential men inside the growing railroad industry. One of those men was Thomas A. Scott, a powerful railroad executive who became Carnegie's mentor. That relationship changed everything. Under Scott's guidance, Carnegie entered the railroad business during one of the most explosive periods of industrial expansion in American history. Railroads connected cities, transported goods, and fueled America's economic growth. Carnegie quickly understood that massive fortunes would not come from simple labor. They would come from controlling industries that the entire country depended on. And Carnegie wanted control. He began investing money carefully while still young. Unlike workers who spent wages immediately, Carnegie saved aggressively and studied markets constantly. He invested in railroads, bridges, oil, and industrial companies whenever opportunities appeared promising. While other immigrants struggled simply to survive, Carnegie slowly climbed into America's growing class of businessmen. But ambition changed him. As Carnegie accumulated wealth, his personality became increasingly intense and calculating. He admired efficiency almost obsessively. He believed weakness created failure. He respected power, discipline, and productivity above nearly everything else. Deep inside his mind, poverty remained an enemy that could never be allowed to return. Then Carnegie discovered steel. During the 19th century, steel was becoming one of the most important materials in the modern world. Railroads, bridges, buildings, factories, and infrastructure all depended on it. Carnegie recognized the opportunity immediately. Whoever controlled steel could help shape the future of industrial America itself. And so Carnegie went all in. He poured enormous amounts of money into steel production, building factories larger and more advanced than many competitors could imagine. He studied manufacturing methods obsessively, searching for any improvement that could increase efficiency and lower costs. Carnegie became famous for pushing production to extreme levels. He demanded constant growth, constant speed, and constant profits. But there was a hidden cost behind that success. Inside Carnegie's steel mills, conditions were often horrifying. Workers endured 12-hour shifts surrounded by unbearable heat and deafening machinery. Molten steel exploded unexpectedly. Toxic smoke filled the air. Safety standards were minimal by modern standards, and injuries were common. Men worked until complete exhaustion because losing a job could mean starvation for entire families. Yet Carnegie's factories kept expanding. The Steel King believed competition was ruthless by nature. If he slowed down, another businessman would take his place. That mentality pushed Carnegie to become more aggressive with every passing year. He cut costs relentlessly. He squeezed maximum productivity from workers. Every improvement in efficiency meant larger profits and greater dominance over competitors. And the profits became enormous. By the late 19th century, Carnegie Steel had transformed into one of the most powerful industrial companies in America. Railroads depended on Carnegie's steel. Cities depended on it. America's industrial future itself seemed connected to Carnegie's empire. As his fortune exploded, newspapers began portraying him as a genius businessman who embodied the American dream. But workers inside the mills saw a different reality. Many laborers believed they were being sacrificed to build Carnegie's fortune. Injuries remained frequent. Exhaustion became normal. Entire communities depended on steel jobs, giving workers little choice except to endure brutal conditions. Carnegie publicly praised hard work and opportunity, yet many employees felt trapped inside an unforgiving industrial machine. And Carnegie himself seemed increasingly distant from ordinary workers. He spent more time among wealthy businessmen, politicians, and powerful industrial leaders. His confidence grew alongside his fortune. He spoke passionately about progress, capitalism, and success. He believed industrial expansion would ultimately improve society. But critics quietly began asking a dangerous question. Was Carnegie creating prosperity for America, or simply creating wealth for himself? The contradiction at the center of Carnegie's life became harder to ignore. He often spoke about morality, education, and self-improvement, yet his empire depended on workers enduring conditions many considered inhumane. He praised opportunity while demanding extreme sacrifices from laborers. To supporters, Carnegie represented ambition and genius. To critics, he represented the growing cruelty of industrial capitalism. And the tension inside his empire was quietly building toward something explosive. Because while Carnegie celebrated profits and expansion, anger inside the steel mills continued growing. Workers were exhausted. Wages became a constant source of conflict. Labor unions started organizing. Across industrial America, workers increasingly believed giant corporations cared more about profits than human lives. Inside Carnegie Steel, that anger would eventually erupt into one of the most violent labor conflicts in American history. And when it happened, the carefully crafted image of Andrew Carnegie as the heroic self-made billionaire would begin to crack apart in front of the entire nation. By the early 1890s, Andrew Carnegie stood at the top of America's industrial empire. His steel mills produced enormous amounts of material that helped build railroads, skyscrapers, bridges, and entire cities across the nation. Politicians admired him. Newspapers praised his intelligence. Business leaders feared his growing power. To millions of Americans, Carnegie represented the ultimate success story, a poor immigrant who conquered the industrial age through ambition and hard work. But beneath the surface of that success, anger was boiling. Inside Carnegie Steel factories, workers lived under relentless pressure. The company constantly pushed for higher production, lower costs, and greater efficiency. Men worked exhausting shifts under dangerous conditions while management monitored productivity obsessively. Workers feared injuries, layoffs, and wage cuts almost constantly. Many believed they were sacrificing their health and lives to make one man unimaginably wealthy. And then the tension exploded. The conflict that would permanently stain Carnegie's reputation began in Homestead, Pennsylvania, one of the most important steel plants in Carnegie's empire. By this time, Carnegie had already become one of the richest businessmen in the world, but he wanted even greater efficiency and lower labor costs. His trusted business partner, Henry Clay Frick, was placed in charge of handling labor negotiations. Frick was known for being cold, aggressive, and deeply anti-union. While Carnegie often spoke publicly about morality and progress, Frick believed unions threatened corporate control. Together, Carnegie and Frick prepared for confrontation. The company announced wage cuts at the Homestead plant, and workers responded with outrage. The Steelworkers Union refused to accept the reductions, believing they were already risking their lives for the company every single day. What happened next shocked the entire country. Frick locked workers out of the steel plant and surrounded the factory with fences topped with barbed wire. The area began looking less like a workplace and more like a military fortress. Tension filled the town. Families feared violence was coming. Workers armed themselves and prepared to defend the plant from replacement laborers. Then Frick hired Pinkerton agents. The Pinkertons were essentially private armed security forces often used by powerful corporations during labor disputes. Hundreds of armed Pinkerton guards traveled toward Homestead by riverboat in an attempt to take control of the steel mill. But when workers discovered the plan, thousands gathered near the river to stop them. The confrontation quickly became violent. Gunfire erupted between workers and Pinkerton agents. Chaos consumed the town. Men were shot. Blood covered the ground. Smoke filled the air as both sides exchanged fire for hours. Families watched in horror while one of the most infamous labor battles in American history unfolded in front of them. By the end of the conflict, multiple people were dead. The Homestead strike became national news almost instantly. Across America, newspapers published shocking images and dramatic stories about the violence. For many ordinary citizens, the event exposed the brutal reality hidden behind industrial wealth. The steel empire that helped build modern America suddenly looked stained with blood. And Andrew Carnegie was nowhere to be found. At the time of the strike, Carnegie was in Scotland, far away from the violence-consuming Homestead. Publicly, he avoided direct responsibility for the conflict. But critics argued that the conditions leading to the disaster were created by Carnegie's obsession with profits and control. Workers believed Carnegie had betrayed the very people who helped build his fortune. That accusation haunted his legacy forever. The strike eventually collapsed after government troops arrived and restored company control over the factory. The union was weakened dramatically, and Carnegie Steel regained dominance. From a business perspective, Carnegie and Frick had won. But morally, the damage was enormous. Many Americans no longer viewed Carnegie as the noble self-made hero he claimed to be. Instead, they saw something darker. They saw a billionaire who publicly spoke about kindness while workers died inside his industrial empire. They saw a man who praised education and morality while aggressively crushing labor resistance. The contradiction between Carnegie's public image and the reality of his factories became impossible to ignore. And yet Carnegie continued presenting himself as a philosopher of wealth. In 1889, Carnegie had published an essay called The Gospel of Wealth, which became one of the most famous statements about money and philanthropy in American history. In it, Carnegie argued that wealthy individuals had a moral obligation to use their fortunes to improve society. He believed the rich should donate money to education, libraries, science, and public institutions rather than simply passing wealth to their children. To supporters, the essay sounded visionary. But to critics, it sounded deeply hypocritical. How could a man preach morality while workers suffered inside his factories? How could someone claim to care about humanity while aggressively fighting labor unions and reducing wages? Those uncomfortable questions followed Carnegie everywhere after Homestead. Still, Carnegie remained determined to control his legacy. As he grew older, he slowly stepped away from direct industrial management. But his fortune kept growing at astonishing speed. Carnegie Steel became one of the most valuable industrial companies in the world. America itself was entering a new era of giant corporations, massive wealth, and industrial domination, and Carnegie stood near the center of it all. Then came the deal that changed his life forever. In the early 20th century, powerful banker J.P. Morgan approached Carnegie with an extraordinary proposal. He wanted to buy Carnegie Steel and combine it into an even larger corporate empire. Morgan envisioned creating a gigantic industrial corporation that would dominate American steel production on an unprecedented scale. Carnegie agreed. The sale made headlines across the world. When Carnegie sold his steel empire to Morgan in 1901, the deal created one of the largest business transactions in history at the time. The new corporation eventually became U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar company in America. And Carnegie became richer than ever before. The immigrant boy who once struggled to survive in factory neighborhoods had now accumulated a fortune so massive that it almost seemed unreal. Adjusted for modern inflation, Carnegie's wealth would rank among the greatest fortunes ever created. He had achieved what millions only dreamed about. But instead of continuing to expand his business empire, Carnegie focused almost entirely on giving money away. And he gave away enormous amounts. Libraries appeared across America funded by Carnegie's fortune. Schools, universities, scientific institutions, music halls, and educational foundations received millions of dollars. Carnegie believed knowledge could transform society because education had transformed his own life. He wanted ordinary people to have opportunities that poverty once denied him. In total, Carnegie donated the majority of his fortune before his death. To many people, this transformed him into a heroic figure once again. Newspapers praised his generosity. Communities celebrated his donations. Libraries bearing his name appeared across multiple countries. Carnegie became associated not only with steel and industry, but also with education and culture. Yet the shadow of Homestead never fully disappeared. Even while Carnegie funded libraries and universities, critics remembered the workers who suffered inside his mills. They remembered the violence, the wage cuts, and the ruthless tactics used against labor unions. Some historians later argued that Carnegie spent the final decades of his life trying to morally redeem himself through philanthropy. Whether that redemption was genuine remains debated even today. Perhaps Carnegie truly believed his donations would improve humanity. Perhaps he felt guilt over the human cost of industrialization. Or perhaps he simply wanted history to remember him differently. The truth is difficult to know because Carnegie himself remained a complicated and deeply contradictory figure until the very end. He loved literature, yet built an empire on brutal industrial labor. He spoke about morality, yet tolerated ruthless business tactics. He believed in helping society, yet fought fiercely to maintain control over workers. Like many powerful men of the industrial age, Carnegie contained both extraordinary ambition and extraordinary contradiction. And maybe that is why his story still fascinates people more than a century later. Andrew Carnegie was not simply a billionaire. He represented the rise of industrial America itself, an era where fortunes became larger than ever before, corporations gained enormous influence, and the line between progress and exploitation became dangerously blurred. His life embodied the promise and darkness of the American dream. A poor immigrant truly did rise from nothing to unimaginable wealth. But the road to that success was paved with sacrifice, labor, conflict, and suffering on a scale many people preferred not to see. Carnegie helped build modern America, but he also revealed the brutal price industrial capitalism could demand from ordinary human beings. By the time Carnegie died in 1919, the world had changed dramatically from the one he entered as a poor Scottish immigrant. Steel towers dominated city skylines. Industrial corporations controlled enormous wealth. America had become a global economic power. And much of that transformation was connected, directly or indirectly, to the empire Carnegie built. Yet perhaps the most haunting question surrounding his legacy still remains unanswered. Was Andrew Carnegie truly a generous visionary who gave back to society? Or was he a ruthless empire builder trying to wash away the darker truths behind his fortune? Maybe the answer lies somewhere between those two extremes. Because history often remembers men like Carnegie not as simple heroes or villains, but as powerful individuals whose ambition changed the world forever, no matter how many people were crushed beneath the weight of that success. Thank you for joining me on today's journey into one of history's darkest hidden stories. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you again in the next mystery hidden inside history.